get through the content.
This meeting is being recorded.
And the meeting is being recorded. What I'd like to, that's something that you need to be reminded of. And the other thing is that, oh my goodness, I forgot what I was supposed to tell. Dr. Makings would like to know where everyone's from. So if you can either put it in the chat box, or if we just want, it's kind of hard to go around the room when you can't go around the room.
Yeah, okay.
So
No, that's
if
fine.
you
Just
put it in the chat box, it's going to be, oh, here we go. We've got Gary from Idaho. That we've got a Pocatello group here. I know that. I saw that. Got lots of them coming up. Mel Nichols is from Pocatello. Kathy McDoodle's from Boise. Hauser is from Pocatello. Gay Mackey from Idaho. Mel Nicholas. I know that Dr. Stevens is from Pocatello. I actually had met him quite a few years ago when I was at the health department. So him, I do know where he's from. Sheena is from Memphis, is from Boise by way of Memphis. She's been here for about 30 years. I'm from Boise. I moved here from Tennessee, but was from Idaho to begin with. So thus far, that's who we have. And I'd like to again remind everyone kind of the house rules. You can come and go as you wish and re-enter if that seems to be the case. And put your questions in the chat box, and that we ask that everyone be respectful of one another in our language and such. So, Dr. Makings, it's all up to you now.
okay. Thank you very much. And I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. And yes, I will try to not move around as much as I did last week. So I don't know, 40 some years of habit of walking around the classroom is kind of hard to overcome here for a while, but I'm working on it. So what we'd like to do for these next two meetings, take some time today to review and summarize, some of the problems and the challenges that we talked about last week. And I brought in a few more just bits of information that I ran across over the week. And then take part of today, and I don't know how much time we'll have for that, but then next week, I wanted to really hit the, what can we do? And I know that I've done this kind of class several times, and I know that we spend 2, maybe 3 weeks or whatever talking about this, and we get into more and more in depth about some of the possibilities that I'll be talking about tonight that might happen. It gets pretty grim and pretty much of a downer. So I wanted to then finish off the 3-week little meeting that we have here with some upsides, with what kinds of things are possible, what kinds of things am I as an individual doing, some of those sorts of things. So we'll that's kind of where we'll be tonight. Okay, so to kind of get back to the climate change that we started talking about, and this is one of the things that I think is really unfortunate, that we don't seem to have not a whole lot of people are out there talking about some of the future impacts and some of the side impacts of climate change. And I think that leads some people to think that, well, yeah, got a little bit warmer, and so what? Well, we'll turn my air conditioner up a little bit, and then away we go. But there are, and we mentioned some of these a little bit last week. There are some major kinds of things that will happen, and there are some major kinds of things that might happen as a result of the of climate change, and then some of the other secondary sort of impacts that we're seeing here. So some of these things, and we did talk a little bit last week about possible future pandemics. Now remember that with this climate change, we are thawing not only in the bog areas of some places and the tundra area, but ice and so forth. we are thawing out some of these regions that have been frozen for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. And there are bacteria, possible bacteria and viruses and so forth that have survived and remained viable for all of that time. And so there's a possibility that, you know, we're going to see some more of these new that is new to us, and the things that are, you know, our body we simply have no immunities to. So it would not be surprising to me if we see some more pandemics and outbreaks of different strains of flu and some of those sorts of things. And that's going to then contribute to this overall, I guess, angst about the whole climate change and some of the negative aspects of it. Infrastructure change and infrastructure damage. The Great Alaska Pipeline, the Prudhoe Pipeline, and some of those other things were built in and stabilized by permafrost. And again, that's been frozen for thousands of years. And now some of that is beginning to thaw and beginning to melt. And we are seeing weaknesses in some of those. I don't have, you know, I'm not going to point out specific things, but just as a general rule, as that permafrost, for example, begins to thaw and soften, then anything from the foundations of buildings, from small, you know, Inuit villages up there and some of their small houses, to some more major kinds of structures and buildings. And as we mentioned last week, more and more severe weather. What is it? Hurricane Ian coming ashore there in Florida, and you know, that's having a great impact down there. And as the human population continues to grow, then, and in fact, there was a little thing on the NPR tonight. I was just listening to it, and I thought Idaho, maybe just for the last year or so, Idaho has been one of the fastest growing states in the country. But over the last, I guess they said 10 years, Florida has grown dramatically. And so we have more and more people moving down there, and then we're having more and more severe and more frequent storms. You know, we have more and more people, more and more infrastructure, more and more damage to that infrastructure there. So that's again going to be one of those things that we're going to have to deal with. Shortages and disruptions in the food cycles and you know, the food flow and so forth. Again, with droughts, and flood, and etc. You know, and even, you know, you look at you'd think, well, you know, warmer, longer growing seasons, that would be good for everything. But there are actually a number of plants that are very susceptible to, you know, very hot temperatures, and especially hot temperatures early in the growing season or whatever, that are going to be negatively impacted by some of these things. And then the last item that I wanted to talk just briefly a little bit about, and I don't want to seem like I'm a you know, off my hinge survivalist hoarder kind of thing, but I think that, you know, that's certainly some possibilities that I wanted to mention. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor, and again, being here in Kimberly, Twin Falls, and owning a little tiny bit of land here, and then owning some land here in Kansas, up here in the northwest corner of Kansas, where my great grandfather homesteaded back in the mid 1880s. And by the way, that original homestead quarter, I think I mentioned this, is still owned by the family. So, and you can look at this, you can see the darker colors over here are the severity of the drought. Down in through here, here parts of Utah, of course, you know, California is suffering from some major droughts, part of the problem with all of their fires. But I've been through here in Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, down in through here, and then even the not moving away from the red and the brown there, just the yellow, darker colors of abnormally dry, so forth. Wheat crops are down. I know I have some land there that my brother farms it. My brother and a good friend that I have back there, and renting the land out. Uh, planted some milo this spring, several hundred acres of milo. We got a little bit of rain in the spring. Everything looked really pretty good. My brother spent some extra money to put on some extra fertilizer, and it turned off dry. And in fact, he sent me some pictures about, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. And there's, you know, it just looks like dry weeds out there. In many places, there weren't even any heads that formed for, where the grain is. And back there, so then we have crop insurance, but the appraiser came out, and typically what they do in those kinds of areas, they will say, well, you go ahead and harvest it and see how many, the yield you get, how many bushels per acre. And then we look at for example, they look at the county average for, acres, bushels of barley or wheat per acre. And if you got less than the county average, then they would pay you for up to the county average. The appraiser came out and he said, don't even bother about running a combine through there. And he said, for one thing, it's just going to waste the fuel. And for another thing, as dry as it is, you may very well start a fire out there. So they just wrote off the entire crop then. And so, I do get a little bit of money back out of this thing. It's not like it was back in the Dust Bowl days when my grandparents had no crop insurance or anything like that. And if they went out and they didn't spend near the money on fertilizer and all that stuff, but all of the work that they did, getting the crop planted and tilling it a little bit and getting all that. And if they had a crop failure like this, they were just out that money. They were just out that time and work. So the situation for the farmers anyway is a little bit better than it was, but we are still talking about possibilities of major shortages of some crops in through these areas. Politics and social unrest. Just wanted to mention this a little bit. And I think we talked last week about I thought it was a very interesting program on 60 Minutes last week. And they were talking about the concept of that it used to be in politics that the other person, whoever, the other person, the senator sitting across the aisle from you, or, a person from a different political party or a slightly different persuasion or whatever, that other person had a bad idea. Well, he or she probably thought it was a good idea, but nevertheless, you think, well, I don't agree with that, or that's a bad idea. And that has moved now in much of politics to the other person is a bad person. And so that's a whole different kind of ball game. So that we are now, many times, we see in local politics and just local discussions with people, the discussions that I have with folks around here, and even it appears at the national level, get this, if the Democrats brought it up, it's a bad idea, or if the Republicans brought it up, well, that's a bad idea, we're not going to do that. And we have really seemed to have moved away from the days that I remember as a youngster, and even not that many years ago as a young adult, and listening to some debates and discussion, and there were the whole approach seemed to be, well, I'm a good conservative Republican, and this is what I think, and I don't quite agree with what you think there, but you know what? I've got an idea that I would like to promote, and I can help you promote your idea a little bit. You help me promote my idea, and we'll maybe tone both of them down a little bit and see if we can get some action. There seems to be very, very little of that these days, and I think, unfortunately, getting worse. One of the things that has made this situation much worse, of course, and I think probably you all very well know, is this whole social media thing that promoting some of these conspiracy ideas, or just reverberating the bad words that some people have to say about other people. And that one of the things that people sometimes don't realize is that the social media places, a lot of them make money off of selling targeted advertising to certain, certain businesses or so forth. And so what they are able to do is gather information about you and me and everybody else around there, and then feed each one of us overwhelmingly the kinds of things that we have already looked at, or that the social media companies are realizing that we already believe in, or that we already think this way. So they are continually then feeding everybody, but certainly some of those people on the fringes, they're constantly being fed some of the same information that just reinforces what they believed, regardless of how how untrue or false it may have been. So there is a significant amount of blame, I think, to be placed on those companies, and especially what they're doing there to make a profit. We also see this concept of entitlement or demanding, and an entitlement. We see that on both ends of the political spectrum. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of politics, but it kind of bothers me to see people out there, these younger people coming out with $40,000 or $50,000 in student loans, and then they got a degree in some obscure little thing, and now they can't get a job that pays $150,000 a year. Well, my wife and I both went through college, and we did borrow some money, but we lived frugally. We worked part-time. We did all of those sorts of things, and yeah, we borrowed. So we had some student loans, and we diligently paid them off within a couple of years after we graduated, and so I really have a hard time feeling sorry for some of those folks. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum just demanding this and that and everything else. So here's one of the things that I wanted to and we're moving away from science now. So this is probably not scientific, but several years ago, a really neat little publication that I subscribe to, the High Country News. I would encourage any of you who are interested to look that up and maybe even subscribe, or they have some newsletters and that kind of stuff. Actually, it's a small, kind of locally owned reporting or newspaper. Used to be a newspaper, now kind of a weekly, monthly magazine, and started off in a little tiny town in Colorado back years ago, back in the, I think even the late 60s and early 70s. When I was in college was when they first started coming out. And yes, they are what many people would say is liberal. They report on environmental factors and all that sort of stuff. Several years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they ran a little, well, it wasn't a contest or anything, but they just opened it up to the public and invited everybody to write an essay on the future. What do you see is in the future, maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the road there? What's the political situation? What do things look like? And I was reading a couple of articles then that they published after this, a bunch of these essays had come in, and it was kind of interesting, very interesting, that there were 3 general categories of the essays of what the future might look like. One of them is the whole idea of we all get together, we all contribute our share, we all help each other, so forth. A whole bunch of little things that we do, install some solar panels and recycling and etc. And that was one way that we all come together and help. We're certainly going to still have some impacts from climate change, but won't be quite as bad. Then there was a group of essays that sort of built around the theme of the environmental police state, that very, very strict laws on, anything from idling your car in the line at the fast food restaurant to all kinds of stuff. And even a couple of them talked about the eco-vigilantes, the people who are going out and tracking down the the folks that they remembered who were polluters from 10 and 15 years ago. And then the third group was basically built around the theme that politics and most of civil society just pretty well gave way to just roving bands of roving bands of criminals, or roving bands of people who are just out there, and that would simply boil down to a whole series of just what they called tribal warfare. Somebody used the word civil war, like this state against that state, and a lot of these essays were, no, it's not going to be anything like that. It's not going to be Idaho, and then they send out a small army, and then they or the armies fight. That it was just going to be, as I said, just roving bands of people, robbing and stealing, and whatever they could run across. So that was a pretty grim, pretty sad kind of outlook. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, and that kind of informs, or kind of built for me anyway, it made a lot of sense that we have these options, but we are going to have to decide and then act vigorously on which way we want to go there. And of course, I think we would all rather see everybody get together and share and all that sort of stuff. So again, I don't want to get too grim and grisly here, but those are some of the possibilities that we're looking at. And let me just go on. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today, again, just what we can do in very general kinds of terms, and then take some time this evening, and then next week just maybe have a whole bunch of time to share some ideas and some possibilities here. One of the things that I've mentioned before, no solution is perfect. Putting up passive solar panels, which I did. And yes, at some point, they are going to have to be replaced or refurbished, or we're going to have to recycle some stuff from them. And yeah, that's true. There's going to be that. I testified at the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management hearing on the Lava Ridge big, huge wind farm that they're proposing for just out here in Jerome County. And I wrote an opinion article and submitted it to it, and then I had a 3-minute slot to testify to and express my thoughts. Basically, what I did, tried to be as as positive, and I am as positive as I can possibly be, that climate change is going to impact all of us, every one of us here, and our kids and our grandkids, and that therefore all of us have a duty and a moral responsibility to do everything that we can to. We may not be able to avert or avoid the whole thing, but we can at least mitigate it and minimize the damage and the disruption as much as we possibly can. So everybody has a duty, a role to contribute or sacrifice, or whatever word you want to use there a little bit. And one of the things, I've talked about putting up these solar panels, and the first question I get from a lot of people is, well, yeah, but what, how long is it going to take you to pay that off? That 25-year payoff, or 20 or whatever? And hey, I can kind of remember what they given how much electricity I currently use and the rate for electricity currently and all that sort of stuff. And this is an approximation of how long it'll take to pay it off. A lot of things can change, of course. If electric rates go up, then it takes less time. And I'm not foolhardy. I don't go out and just blow my money on everything. But in all honesty, that was not the primary factor there in what I did. I was looking at, I'm going to be making a contribution. I'm going to be generating some electricity, which means that there's maybe a little bit of electricity that won't be generated by a coal-fired power plant out there. And I also am in the process of buying an electric car. That's getting to be a real, that's getting to be a real kind of a circus ride there with all of the stuff going on there with that, and wait times and et cetera. But anyway, and again, what that comes down to me is not the main thing of the payoff time or the payback time or the return on investment. I'm looking at it as, yes, I'm going to get some of my money back, but along with that, then I am helping to make life maybe a little bit better for my grandkids and your grandkids and everybody's grandkids. And I think people need to start looking at that, looking at some of those investments in those modes. And again, develop a better understanding of how the carbon cycle works, and some of these things like carbon storage that we hear about every so often. Somebody's got this great idea that we could pump this and condense this carbon dioxide and freeze it, and then we can put it in these big storage tanks. And I'm going, well, yeah, but I mean, how long are you going to be able to store that in there? How much energy is it going to cost you to keep that, all that, eventually that stuff's going to go, probably going to end up right back in the atmosphere. All right, let's see here. These are some things that I, kind of wanted to get into and open up a little bit more of a discussion kind of thing. So let me, I thought there was another slide that I had in here. No, I guess. No, okay. All right. Oh, I'm getting a little bit ahead here. So I guess at this time there seem to be some questions there in the chat room. Let's because I kind of rushed through some of this last minute stuff, and then I know there may be some questions even from last week. So Debbie, if you could, let's just go ahead and take a quick listen to some of those questions or comments, and then we can cover that tonight, and then really get into some more of the specific kinds of things of what we can do to eliminate this. We can get into that next week then. Is that all right? Oops, I can't hear you.
What in the chat room, what it is people are telling where they came from.
Oh,
and
okay.
there aren't any questions as such right at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's let me go ahead and I know that I'm getting well ahead of myself, and maybe we may finish up a little bit earlier tonight, and then still leave some time for next week. But let me just go down through some general kinds of things that we can do, and then next week, guys, we will just try to open it up to any kinds of questions and any kinds of specific activities that you might like or whatever. And I realize we kind of moved through some of these topics a little faster than I would have. And of course, again, I think I was planning on having questions and stuff during that time, but we'll be all right. I'm going to go down through some of this stuff here tonight, and that'll give everybody some food for thought. And when we come back next week, I hope that it's really kind of a fun one next week, of everybody coming up with some ideas of some things that they can do. So just some of the things that anywhere from broad scale global kinds of things to what individual people can do. One of the problems that we have, again, and we've talked about, some people talked about, well, we make fun of that beef produce a lot of methane in their production, and that is true. They do, because their digestive system is different. They're ruminants, and there's some anaerobic digestion, and they do belch out carbon dioxide. But there are a lot of other factors that go into and contribute, and that's political, economic kinds of things, is the decentralization, or the centralization, I'm sorry, the centralization, this is what we can do, the centralization of things like food processing, milk production, and so forth. You know, again, when I was a kid, it used to be, and for years there, every farmer there in Kansas or wherever, just about everybody had a few cattle. A lot of people would have 2 or 3 milk cows, and maybe a few other cows that they had around. Western Kansas is pretty flat, and it's but there are places where there's some kind of rolling hills, and places that are just a little bit too steep to cultivate and grow crops on. So just about every farmer had a little bit of pasture land around there, and they would raise a little bit of alfalfa or some cane or something and bale it, and then feed their cattle in the wintertime. And maybe it was 10, 15, 20 cattle, and they'd sell some calves, or they would sell some. And a lot of the little towns had butcher plants, locker rooms and butcher plants. I can remember Atwood had its own little flour mill there, and it's now, I mean, that's closed up, years and years ago. But people would bring their flour into town, and it would be ground right there, and then they'd bring their wheat into town, and then they take it back home. Well, what that does is, is cut down on a lot of this transportation cost, and especially the carbon dioxide that's produced during all of this, moving things back and forth from several hundred miles away, and large massive feedlots, and then moving hundreds of cattle, maybe several hundred miles, or at least a couple hundred miles away, and for the processing. I know Falls brand meat down here is a big pork processor, and I think they have diversified some. But at one time, the majority of the hogs that they process down here in this plant came from North and South Dakota. So I mean, those hogs are being hauled in from that far away. And then of course, Falls brand ham and all that sort of stuff is trucked to all over the country. So again, a part of that is the centralization of those kinds of activities that, first of all, they just totally wrecked some of the old downtown parts. They're just, again, like I said, Atwood used to have its own little flour mill. I think at least 2 different butcher shops, and service stations back when I don't know how many of you, well, probably most of you guys can remember a service station. I know I mentioned that word to my kids the other day, and they had no idea what a service station was. Somebody comes out and actually pumps your gas for you, and checks your tire pressure, and wash your windshield. They'd never heard or seen that thing before. So just a lot of those kinds of changes, in some of these little hometowns. Okay. Again, some small scale, like home solar panels and wind systems. I know that I am not, making a global impact here, but I also know that on some of these hot summer days that we had last summer, and everybody was running the AC, and I could get online to including my brother-in-law who rents this place down here, and I'd get online to my little monitor for my system up here, and even on the hottest of days, during the daytime, the electricity that we were generating from the solar panels we were still using that here, but still had a little bit left that we were feeding back into the grid. So we were that's one household that wasn't maximizing and putting a lot of pressure on the grid. And and so we're pretty well, we're not off the grid, and we still, of course, rely on it at times in the winter, when we don't have as much daylight, why we will be relying on the grid a little bit. But again, we're still contributing some and not maximizing or putting stress on the system. Compost, that's one of those things that, remember when we talked about the carbon cycle, we talked about specifically with trees. Trees are great and wonderful things, and I'll mention trees again more later on. Trees are great and wonderful things, but remember, eventually that tree is going to die, and even before it dies, the leaves fall off, some of the limbs fall off, some of that kind of stuff. Even before that tree dies, some of the carbon that it has stored in there is going to be released back into the atmosphere. So it's not like it's, we're sequestering this thing and some of these trees, yes, could live to be 100 years old, but ultimately that carbon is going to go back into the atmosphere. So, and I know this sounds strange to some people, and I've mentioned this to several folks, one of the best things we can do with trees is to use them, and I'll mention this again later on. One of the best things that we can do with trees, of course, is shade and all that kind of stuff, and cool and beautiful. But eventually then use that as fuel to replace, somebody buying some propane or using a bunch of natural gas to heat their house. So, and the things like the outdoor boilers these days that you can actually have your wood burning stove is outside and or off in a little shed off or by itself, and then heats water and then pumps the water through the house or into a heat pump and that kind of stuff. So a lot of things we can do there. Oops. Now we'll go back to the slideshow here. I'm sorry. Another factor that is contributing to all of this is human population growth. And again, remember, I grew up in the days of Paul Ehrlich's population bomb and some of those other kinds of things, lifeboat ethics and etc. ZPG, zero population growth. I mean, that was a big, very active organization and entity for quite a few years there. That just, if you stop to think about it, that's the growth of the human population is I mean, that's, well, we put that one slide up there the other day, the human population growth compared to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And yes, it's not that a bunch of humans are out there breathing out carbon dioxide. It is that we were, that got into the industrial era, and so we were using coal and that kind of stuff. But more as the population grows, not only they're putting more and more stress on all of these systems, and they are also using more energy and etc. So that is one of the things that we're going to have to take a look at. And here's one of mine: drive less, drive slower, and don't idle. That's one of my little kind of personal little gripes. Drive by the school down here at 3:15, and there is, I mean, a block of cars lined up. I mean, a line of cars several blocks long, sitting there waiting to pick up the kids from school. And I can go down through there, and 90% of those cars are sitting there idling, and then they'll move a little bit, and then they sit there idle and move a little bit, and that just, I don't know, that just bugs me. And recycling is another one of those things that we really need to get into. And let me back up there. And then this ties back in with our discussion of plastics too. I can remember when all of this plastic stuff was first coming out, and there was all kinds of hype and hoopla about we can recycle all of this plastic, and we just take it back down there, and we can melt it back down, and we can make another plastic bottle out of it, or we can make another plastic whatever out of it. And yeah, some of that was true. And a lot of that was, advertising hype from from large corporations. Um, it is not quite as easy to recycle that plastic as they were letting on. And then again, some of the biggest problems we have is that the people, you and me, well, not us, but there are people out there who, first of all, just don't even bother to recycle it. You just throw it in the trash or throw it outside, and it ends up going down the storm drain or ends up out someplace, and then tons of it are out there floating around in the Pacific Ocean. But then they also, if they do, then here's a recycling bin. Well, I see lots of people go by and they'll throw a half full Pepsi bottle in there, and maybe they had a wrapper off their hamburger that they throw in there too, into the recycling thing. Well, somebody has to go through and clean all of that stuff out, and that's labor intensive, and then filter out the stuff that won't recycle, and then try to get the stuff that does recycle into the stream. There for several years, we were shipping a lot of this to Asian countries. They had significant populations and pretty low wages and so forth, and they would manually sort through a lot of that plastic, and then actually then keep it right there. And they had some facilities to melt down that plastic. It was kind of a lower grade material then, but then make it into plastic parts for toys and some of that sort of stuff. A lot of those facilities, a lot of those countries no longer accept plastic from the United States because it costs them so much to remove all of the trash, not only just the human cost of removing it, but then what do you do with it then after that? What do you do with this stuff that doesn't recycle? And so then they have to take it off the landfill or someplace. And so there have been several companies that have over the years have really stopped taking our recyclable, quote, recyclable stuff. And I know that's, again, I noticed that around here, there are just fewer places that will accept plastic. Okay, so I know we have some time left, and I do apologize that I kind of got through this here sooner than I had planned on it, but and I would like to still meet next week, and in fact we could even spend some time tonight just talk about what kinds of things, and if this you guys out there, you may want to start adding this to the chat, and we can discuss a few things tonight and then hit next week with what are some things that you think that you can do, or what are the things that you would like to do, or what are the things that you would like to see done to maybe help the situation. I've talked a little bit about some of the things that I do. Kathy and I are big on composting. Very little of our organic matter, whether it be food waste or we collect it. Of course, we have a small farm down here that and I have planted some trees, and I go around and dig trenches and bury the compost in the trees, in the trenches along by the trees, so that it can bury the garbage so it can decompose. And yes, eventually all of that material does end up, a lot of it does end up back into the atmosphere, but it takes a while to get there, and we are contributing to the growth of the trees and all the plants, and to the viability of the earth and stuff. So, and those are the kinds of things that, it's not a total solution, but it's one of those things that helps a little bit. So, anything else that you guys can think of that you would like to share here?
In the Boise area, I taught classes, 3 classes maybe it was a year and a half ago, all on getting rid of waste in your home, like not as much trash and how to get rid of use of plastics and whatever. but we have a few stores here in town. We've got one that's the first ever built in the United States. It's called Roots Organics. And at Roots Organics, you bring in your container, whatever it is. So they save old bottles and whatever, maybe spice bottles and whatever, and you buy things in bulk. And you can do the same thing at Winco. Now, of course, they don't weigh the container for you. They do here at the Boise Co-op and at Roots Organics, so they can take off that weight from what you're buying. But at when I go to Winco, if I'm going to buy, let's say, sugar, if I'm going to buy sugar, I take something with me to put the sugar in. You can use heavy paper bags or whatever, but something that actually can be recycled. Or I have a lot of bags that I've made out of muslin that I can put fruits and vegetables and things like that in. And I make my own beeswax wraps so that I don't rely on plastic wraps at all, or I try not to rely on any plastic bags. So, that's something that I think most of us can do without any problem at all. And all you have to do is maybe every so often you have to wash your bag because maybe the fruit got, drips on it or something. But
No, but just remembering to do that and getting in the habit of doing that, and Kathy and I do that, you know, not as well as we should, but we do make an effort to try to do some of those kinds of things. And again, going back to just saving energy, cut down on the. You don't have to have your house quite so hot, and we have for quite a few years. We have wood burning stove, and it's amazing the amount of propane or natural gas we don't have to use because of just heat your house with the. Anyhow, so we're gone all day. Especially back when we were both teaching full time, we would get up in the morning and get gone. We'd be gone all day, and maybe have to do tickets at a basketball game that night, so it'd be maybe 9 o'clock when we got back home. And yeah, it was kind of chilly in there for a while, but actually kind of fun to start up the fire and stand there by the fire for a little bit and kind of get warmed up and go take a shower. And just it was kind of neat. But those and a lot of those kinds of things. So
the chat box, there's a notation that Idaho keeps raising its speed limits on the highways and the interstates, which consumes, of course, more fuel. So I think that draws into, we have a lot of non-believers in climate change.
Yeah.
And when you say global warming, of course, I hear this all the time from people. Well, it's not getting warmer. Look at it, it's getting colder. We have, we have all these terrible storms and all this snow and whatever, and they don't understand the concept at all. But I think Idaho has a lot of non-believers in climate change.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, and not only just the citizens, but then the people that they elect. I was around and driving in the days of the Arab Oil Embargo, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, and especially when we talked about inflation and the price of things. But I can remember I graduated from high school in '67, '68. I was going to college, and we went to college a little ways away from home. But we would drive out, and there were times in Hays, Kansas, where I went to Fort Hays State College there, university, and there were gas wars going on, and we could go down and fill up for 19 and 20 cents a gallon. Just good old regular gas, and that was at a service station. Guys would come out and pump your gas for you for 20 to 25 cents a gallon. And then that Arab oil embargo, and that kind of set off a few things. But for a while there, the national speed limit was 55. High on the interstates or whatever, and that was pretty well. The federal government could not go through and set the speed limits for each individual state, but what they did do was to withhold funding for some highway projects if you didn't. So there were some states who didn't, but a lot of them set it at 55. And then eventually, things got a little bit better, and so they started raising them. And I can remember not too many years ago, a debate here in Idaho about raising the speed limit to 80 and then even 70 for trucks. They did finally negotiate that back down a little bit. But I can remember one of the congressmen or one of the state legislatures arguing, well, these poor guys out here having to drive 55 or 60 miles an hour, it's taking them so much longer and they're not making that much money, and the trucking companies are not making as much money because they can't go as fast. And it was kind of interesting that there were actually, during that time, there were actually a good number of large trucking companies who had intentionally gone in and set the the controls on their trucks at 55 or 60, because they realized that was anything above 60, 65, then you really start cutting into your fuel efficiency, your fuel economy, just because of the aerodynamics of any vehicle. So whether it's a truck or a little car, about 55, 60, maybe 65 is about when you start to drop off on your fuel economy. So all these guys are saying, well, we need to raise the speed limit because of so we can help out all the trucking companies, and the trucking companies are saying, we've already set the speeds on our trucks at 55 or 60, just because that's where it saves us some money. So,
well,
we do that with those kinds of things.
M. Ains says that black asphalt roofs and all the heat they draw in really irritate me. All the new homes have them, which I did not know. How can we affect the change to lighter colors and even white roofs?
Yeah. That's, that has struck me too. And of course, Kimberly, Twin Falls, this area, we're just growing like crazy around here. And seem like, and I go through some of these new housing, I don't call them developments anymore, but these housing complexes out in there. And it seemed like every one of them is black asphalt shingles. And I've talked to several different people, and we get things like, well, and because we ventilate, pull air in, and it ventilates through the attic, through above your, and that cools it off and so forth. But I say, I don't know why. And me personally, I don't like that color. So that's just me. But yeah, I don't understand that. I don't know why, but they do.
One thing that I think that is important that we sometimes miss is that our legislators are the ones that are making the laws and what can and cannot be used. And even when it comes to some of the climate types of, or what's happening to our world. And I think that one of the things that we can do is all become more active in choosing who we want as our legislators. Someone that's interested in the climate and interested in saving the world and all of its people. I mean, I think that that's a very important thing, because you have to remember that most of our representatives and all of our representatives have been there forever and ever and ever. And they may be some that are also hanging on to all the old ideas that they thought were wonderful and really aren't.
Yeah. And at the very minimum, I would say at least be willing to listen to some of the data, to some of the science, and we have some people who simply refuse to accept that those things are happening in spite of all of the data around them. So I don't know. I think I talked last week about little presentation that I saw, former President Obama talking about optimism and pessimism and hope. And his comment was, there may be very little optimism, but there is almost always hope. And that's what I try to hang on to. And that's one of the things that I try to avoid during this class is to try to avoid portraying this as a lost cause. We've got all of these things happening and there's nothing we can do about it. Yeah, there are a lot of things happening, and yes, there are some pretty bad things that probably will happen in the future. But there is always an opportunity for us to at least mitigate or reduce the impacts, and maybe, if we all got on board and really worked at it, to really make some significant changes there. So anyway.
Kathy McDougall has said, what can we as individuals do about the drought? Well,
if I were being sort of a smart aleck, one of the things I would say is drink less water, but that's not appropriate. But again, that's one of those things that that is there's a time delay on this, and in the drought, as droughts have been building for some years, and because of the weather patterns and so forth. As individuals, and that's another thing that I really haven't put in here some, but there are states and communities around that are actively discouraging, and in some cases preventing, or making illegal, I guess, people planting lawns. And especially one of the things I know, places like Las Vegas, for example, they're looking at a lot of these areas where you have a little sidewalk and then maybe a 5 or 6 foot area there, and then then somebody's fence on the other side of it, and then putting lawn, grass in all of those areas, and using up water out of the Colorado River. And they are going through, and in some places giving people money, some sort of a rebate for tearing up their lawn, and not just tearing it up and leaving it, but there are lots of things that you can do and make a very attractive surrounding. But there are a lot of things you can do that use a whole lot less water than Kentucky bluegrass.
One of them is using drought-resistant plants, which are usually native plants, and that's getting quite a bit of a foothold in the Boise area. There are a couple nurseries that sell only drought-resistant native plants, and I noticed more people using rocks and native plants where you don't have to water.
Yeah. No, there is, and I'll see if I can run across that and include a link to that article I'm putting together a little, I don't know, kind of a summary that I can send up to you next week, and if email it out to everybody or whatever. But as quite a few hyperlinks and some of that kind of stuff. And there was an interesting article. It was kind of a sarcastically written sort of thing, but anyway, they were talking about some of this activity in Las Vegas. And so one of the comments this reporter got from walking around talking to people was, some guy said, I moved here. Why would I want my yard to look like I live in a desert? And I read that and said, well, why did you move to Nevada? If you didn't want to live in a desert, why are you there? But yeah, there's a lot of that. And then, as you said, the non-believers, or they just don't, they just don't see anything other than what they have done in the past, and they don't recognize the harm and the danger that they're doing. And I mean, having a bunch of grass out there, I mean, but it does use water, and as you can see over here, there are good chunks of Nevada that don't have a whole lot of water anymore.
Right.
I mean, they never have it.
One of the participants has suggested moving from lawn equipment that uses gasoline, which is gasoline powered, mainly our lawnmowers, to go to electric, battery operated. And I see a lot more of those. I just saw a chainsaw. It was a small chainsaw, but it has a battery rather than using a gas motor. And I
Yeah.
thought, that's a pretty neat thing.
And I have, I run, it's more of a hobby than a business, but a little firewood business. It's kind of a long story, but my wife and I decided to sell that property that we did have, and we were going to build a different property, a different place, and et cetera. And then we got caught up in COVID, and then we got caught up in planning and zoning regulations. So anyway, I don't have a wood burning stove anymore, but I have equipment to handle wood. So I am running a little firewood business, and I actually have two battery powered chainsaws. And of course, now I feel really good about that because I'm generating my own electricity. So I mean, not only do I not have to buy gas, I don't have to pay for the electricity that I use with them. And they do a good job. They do a good job, and they're getting to be more and more of those kinds of vehicles around. So I guess, and if you really want to look at the Ford Mustang, they have an all-electric Ford Mustang, and I have not driven one, but I've seen some folks, and they're nice looking, and they will get up and move. I mean, those cars will just plain move. So, and it's all electric. And again, I think I think everybody should be considering some solar panels on their roof. And then if you do something like that, then it just makes perfect sense to go ahead and spend a little bit more money and get you the electric vehicles are not cheap, but especially if you're looking about replacing a vehicle, since you already have that electricity that you're out there grabbing, and you paid for the panels, but you've already paid for that electricity, and they're just generating you electricity there. So anyway, yeah, I do use those two electric chainsaws, and they do a great job.
I have a brother in Pocatello who they had quite a fire at Johnny Creek, and he lives up in that area. But anyhow, he's a builder, and he builds geothermal homes that also are solar homes, and lots of times they're built out of straw bales that have the stuff on the side, and so his homes are almost all. You don't have to hook up to the power and things like that, except you could use it like you do sometimes. But the geothermal, I think, in the Pocatello area, you don't think about geothermal homes and as a means of power and whatever. But if you can do it in Pocatello, you could probably do it just about anywhere, because Pocatello gets pretty cold in the winter.
Yeah. And a lot of the buildings on the campus there at CSI, and of course we're kind of in a unique situation. There is a pool or a stream of fairly warm water, not too far under the ground, and I don't remember exactly. There's a lava, and the geologists have explained all that to me, and I kind of forgot exactly. But there's a good supply of, we have the hot springs down here. I mean, part of the reason that we have all of the trout hatcheries down there is because of the geothermal water, especially in the wintertime. But most of the buildings on campus are heated geothermally. Now, some of them actually just circulate the hot water through the radiators, but most of them, we bring the hot water into a big, boiler system, and then and a heat pump. So you have a heat pump that pulls the heat out of the water and then circulates that around through the buildings. But we've been doing that they were just getting started with that when I was first hired out here in 1980. So
we have a whole section in Boise that's geothermal. I mean, even their swimming pools are geothermal.
That's a good plan.
Kathy McDougall would like to know about what is the cost of solar panel for the average size home.
I don't know. the panels that we put up, I think are pretty close to average. This is actually a little bit smaller house. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So, though that would not be nearly as large as some of them. And of course, when they they went through the bid process and all that sort of stuff, and then so they came up with, here's the size based on your last year's worth of they got the bills from Idaho Power, so this is what your electric bill was for the last year, and that's kind of how they sized it then too. And I had them go like 120% of that average, just because I was thinking I might buy an electric vehicle and some of those other kinds of things. And it cost me, and I knew somebody was going to ask that question. I never can remember for sure, but it was right around 30,000, 30, maybe 34. I can't remember the exact number, but the payback period was, not a whole bunch of years. And one of the nice things there is that there is a tax credit. I can't remember exactly what that number is either, but a significant tax credit that you can spread out over like 5 or 6 years, which means if I owe $500 in federal income tax this year, then I cannot pay that. So let's say that I have 10% of my $30,000, so whatever that amount of money is, I don't have to pay that amount of federal income tax, and you can spread it out over, like, I think it's 5 or 6 years. So
yeah, there is
so
a government program, an Idaho government program that helps you pay for solar.
Yeah.
Kathy, you might want to check into that.
And the same
Any
thing
more?
with thing with electric vehicles. I noticed that in the new, Inflation Reduction Act, I think there's some more, at least some clarification of the electric vehicles that will qualify and how much they will qualify for. Now you don't get a chunk of money, you don't get a bunch of money back from the government, but if you owe $1,000 in income tax, then you don't have to pay that this year, and you have up to 5 years. If you like on the car, if you got a $5,000 credit, then you could go for, if your taxes were $1,000 a year, you could go for 5 years and not pay any taxes. That helps. That helps a lot too. All right, well, guys, I kind of apologize for hustling through some of this stuff, but part of the time I get in there and I know I've been accused of focusing too much on some of this real negative stuff, like like we may be in just a tribal warfare here, and just roving bands of criminals wandering around robbing and stealing and taking your food. And so I try to avoid getting into a whole lot of that discussion. And I've really enjoyed just kind of what we can do things here. I would like to go ahead and let's plan on meeting next week. I have some few things I'm going to look into on some other kinds of ideas of some things that we can do or that are possible. And then maybe just kind of open it up to some, so like we've kind of done a little bit tonight, everybody else's ideas, and then go from there. If that's okay with everybody, well, let's plan on being here 7 o'clock next Wednesday, and we'll continue on and maybe come up with some earth-shattering solutions here. Right?
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you everyone for attending. See you all next week.
All righty, and thank you guys for all of your attention and the input. I really appreciate it. Have a good week.
All right.
Drive less, drive slowly.
Yeah, right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.